So, hello everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live. I'm Lynn Cremando for YogaUOnline. Now, we've all heard the expression, sitting is the new smoking. And it's kind of a way of shorthanding how our modern life has altered some of our movement patterns. We no longer till the fields or hang up clothes or carry buckets of water up hills. And we're not moving through all the planes of motion. And in fact, our movements have become a little bit more repetitive, and we're not doing the full range. And we're instead spending a lot of time sitting, a lot of times in front of technology. So we are going to actually dig into how sitting is the new smoking. And we couldn't ask for a better expert to come and talk to us about it than Lillah Schwartz. Lillah brings to her 32-year career in yoga teaching a background in anatomy, physiology, and movement science. She's also the author of the book, Healing Our Backs with Yoga, an essential guide to back pain relief. So welcome, Lillah.
Hi, Lynn. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Now, I know you have a lot to say on this topic, but I think a good place to start because, and I want to say this in as punny of a way as possible, but you've got a great backstory about how you healed your back with yoga. And I think it's a good idea as an introduction because you're a true subject matter expert in this field.
Yeah.
From firsthand experience. Would you mind sharing a little of your story?
Sure. I'll make it kind of brief. I went down with a horse when I was jumping horses when I was a teenager, busted my tailbone, set up an asymmetric pelvis, which then compromised L4 and L5, created a lot of pinching in that area, and some early disc degeneration, which is something that everybody's a little concerned about. So it became my best teacher because my back pain guided me as to how to best apply yoga to help myself and therefore my students with their back conditions as well.
So great. So if we could go back to the whole sitting, smoking analogy. We know about stooped posture and we know about loss of tone and loss of energy and all of that. But really, what's the problem with sitting?
Well, there's a lot of problems with sitting. You know, when I started yoga for back care and working on myself, it was 1981 when I started teaching yoga. And back then, when I studied everything I could get my hands on, the San Francisco back stabilization program was popular. The Wise Way to a Healthy Back was popular, and mostly it addressed low back spasms for people who did the heavy lifting, the plumbers, the carpenters, the painters, and culturally, mostly those were the men. So at that time. So now in this day and age, because we've shifted from that culture is not so prevalent anymore, and people have shifted to computer work, there's a lot of sitting going down. So both men and women are sitting a lot. And so that's how it's become the new smoking, because everybody's sitting and nobody's really recognizing yet the compromises that are happening in the spine and in the body. So yes, sitting is a compressive activity because if you think of somebody in a wheelchair who does not have the use of their legs, their spine collapses, their organs don't function as well, their breathing doesn't function as well, because we need our legs to extend our spine. So that's the dynamic movement of getting up and really moving, whether it's standing up every hour, walking, doing some yoga poses, whatever it is a person's going to do, they have to do it regularly in order for the legs to help the spine to extend and not get early compression and degeneration on the discs, which then creates problems in the back.
I think you've hit on something really important, which is the whole kinetic chain, that nothing affects just one system. You've got the muscular, you've got the skeletal, you've got the nervous. And so it is tempting to focus on stooped shoulders. But in fact, there's a whole body.
There is a whole body. When we spend a lot of time sitting, not only do we collapse the lumbar curve, so instead of the lumbar curve moving in, it's going to start moving out. Just last week, I went around shopping for the perfect chair, and I found one that was pretty darn good. It only cost me $600 for the right chair. So my standards are fairly high. And I want to take care of my back, so it's important to me that I get the support I need if I'm going to sit at my desk. And everyone, I think, is starting to feel that way culturally. They're getting the idea that, yeah, my back doesn't feel so good if I sit at the desk all day. So that's one thing to notice, that we undo the natural lumbar curve, and in doing that, there is that disc compression that happens, and the disc starts pushing backward into the back of the spine, which is where it's going to pinch. You know, when you get a disc bulge, that's where it goes, and then it pinches the nerves instead of moving in and the disc staying in the center. So there's that aspect, but then there's also the aspect of when we're sitting and collapsing, the weight of the chest actually starts to sit on the diaphragm. And when it sits on the diaphragm, we breathe more shallowly. And then if we lift the chin like this and pinch the back of the neck, and the next thing we know, our brain's not functioning so well because we're not getting enough oxygen to the brain. That happens to me. If I'm at the computer for more than an hour, all of a sudden I notice that my productivity has really slowed down, and that I'm not thinking really clearly, and I go, oh, right, I haven't stood up in a while. Let's get up and breathe, right? So I have a couple of my favorite yoga poses that I throw in there that I like to talk about, that are quick and simple and take 5 minutes, you know, every hour, that kind of thing. But then the other aspect of that is circulation. So the blood pools in the pelvis and the legs, and it doesn't circulate. So that whole thing tends to slow down the metabolism, retard the metabolism. So it's connected. A lot of sitting is connected with premature aging.
Awesome. Not awesome, but really interesting.
Amazingly interesting and good to know, so that we can be proactive about doing something about it.
So, you know, I have a short video. It's like 1:35 seconds, and it is about the discs themselves, because one of the things that happens over repetitive, we could call sitting, as you've just described it, a kind of repetitive motion, or repetitive not motion.
Repetitive not motion, too stationary, right.
That will actually etch these postural habits into the nervous system. The nervous system will then in turn etch the postural habit systems into the spine. I think it would be useful to take a look. I've got a video here of the vertebrae, of the vertebral bodies themselves, that I'd like to share.
Okay.
And let's all take a look at it, and then we'll come back and I'll ask you to talk about it. Is that all right?
Yeah, it's a good video.
A disc is a type of material. It's a soft rubber band-like substance that is sandwiched between the bones of the spine. If the bones of the spine then have a soft, gelatinous, rubber bandish type material called a disc between them. So when you jump up and down, the bones don't hit each other and break. It's a shock absorber. It's a ligament. It holds the bones on top of each other. And it also acts as a spacer. That space is necessary to spread the bones apart from each other to allow the nerves to come out from the middle of the spine into the arms and legs. So the disc is a very, very important structure, but the discs do wear out over time. What we do know is when you were born, it's probably the only time your discs are actually relatively normal. They're full of water, they're normal in shape, they're normal in size, they do their function. As time goes on, the discs start to degenerate. And the degenerative process is something called the degenerative cascade. And most people believe what happens is the chemicals inside the disc, some of the chemicals are called proteoglycans, change their makeup, and it no longer can hold the water in the center of the disc like it did when you're younger. So the water starts to seep out of the disc. And when the water starts to seep out of the disc, that's when you start developing these things called slip discs or bulge discs or herniated discs.
Yeah, so I'll say a couple of things right quick. I think I remember it correctly. I think the fluid nature of the disc, first of all, the discs are really quite strong. It takes a lot to really abuse them. They're quite strong.
Fibrous.
Right. And so a friend of mine said, you know, it's a little bit like having a Michelin tire in between your vertebra and your spine, right? It's a strong substance. And if I'm not mistaken, if I'm remembering correctly, I think we have the fluids up till about age 35, and then we start starting to lose the fluids. Now, the good news is that when someone takes up a yoga practice and they begin to extend their spine, it's actually helping the fluids to pull back into the spine and not to leach out. So it's kind of an interesting thing. I have in my L5-S1 is a very narrow disc space. It's been a narrow disc space for many, many years. Not only that, L5 is slightly slipped forward, so I have a grade 1 spondylolisthesis. I'm not in any pain at any time, and I'm a whole lot older than I was when I first discovered that. Which is why I'm not coloring my hair, because I want people to know there's some wisdom over here.
In the age. I think you hit on something really important, and I think of it as for people who've been living with gravity for a while, can we put it that way?
Mm-hmm.
A new kind of fluidity, that the term about fluidity, that as we're aging and we're living with these bodies and these spines, that hydration needs to come from other places, like movement, like a yoga practice, that to keep the motion and the fluidity, as you have said a few minutes ago, if you're sitting for a really long time and you just suddenly realize, in fact, we've all been sitting here for 15 minutes. How about, could we have one of your quick, would you share one of your quick?
Yeah, so I wrote a blog about it last week on my website, which is, of course, YogaWithLillah.com. And it picked my 3 main poses, and one of them is Utkatasana, which is fierce pose or chair pose. And the reason why I picked it for its efficiency. But it's how you execute it that makes a big difference. So the execution that I suggest is not to let the spine be completely arched with the buttocks protruding way far back, but that you actually hold a block between your knees. Squeeze the block and tweeze the sits bones in so that you find this lift of the pelvic floor and a lift of the bottom of the belly, which then makes the spinal column neutral. You're slightly tipped, but the spine is neutral. It's not arched. So there's no pinching at the back of the facet joints and the back of the discs in the lumbar. It's completely supported and neutral, right? And then the arms can stay on the hips, can go straight out front, or can go overhead, depending on the capacity of the person doing it. Obviously, somebody with high blood pressure shouldn't raise their arms over their head. They should leave their arms out straight, so it's, level with their shoulders. But you can do that 2 or 3 times, hold it for 10, 15 seconds, and you accomplish several things. You tone the pelvic floor, you warm the hips, you get your circulation going, which is part of the problem. You get your circulation going. You support your lower back by toning the transverse abdominis and the pelvic floor.
You're also doing a lot of strengthening.
Lower abdominal strength. Oh, thank you. Bone density.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've already gotten a question about bone density, so please go there.
Okay, so the research shows that holding poses, dynamically holding poses, where the muscles actually hug the bones, which was a very Iyengar idea, you know, my teacher of 30 years, he always used to say, hug the flesh to the bones, squeeze the bones, make them healthy, squeeze them. So when you're doing Utkatasana in this way, and it's not passive, but fully dynamic, using the buttocks, the pelvic floor, the lower abdomen, etc., and you hold it for 8 seconds, which is a really short period of time, that's how long it takes to stimulate the bones to begin to repair.
Yeah, putting a little bit of stress on the spine is one way we can, because we know that you can walk and try to build up your bone density that way, but you can also build up bone density, as you're saying, by stressing the spine a little bit.
Right, so Utkatasana is going to mostly stress the hip joints themselves and the pelvis, which is one of the areas where bone is often lost. The spine is being held neutral, so it's not so much a strength toning directly on the spine itself. So that's why, you know, extension exercises, because my next favorite pose would be Virabhadrasana 1.
In a chair or standing?
It could be done standing with the foot on the floor. It could be standing with the front foot up on a chair. It could go either way. The point is that you really activate the back leg and really lift and extend your spine so that you have, if that back leg is really anchored, then the spine is going to want to go in and up, and you just lift that spine, and so you're bringing the natural curvature back into the spine again, which after 20 minutes of sitting at the chair, I'm now at the front edge of my chair, sitting on my front edge of my sits bones with my spine basically neutral, but there's, of course, neutral means there's a small curve in the lumbar, right? There's an inward curve in the lumbar when we're neutral. So, and then here I am because this is the comfortable position.
I've heard you say, and I think this is important too, sitting is a problem, but sitting badly is a bigger problem. I just paraphrased, but I see clients all the time who are sitting on their sacrums. They're sitting with a posterior tilt, and that is murder on your spine. So how you sit is important.
Right. I read some, I did some research myself recently and looked at something that had been on NPR. I think it was Jean Couch, who wrote Runner's Yoga book. And they had done a special with her on how to make friends with your chair. And one of the things she suggested, which I thought was very helpful, and I hadn't fully cognized it, is that we always, people may think that the knees have to be below the level of the hips.
Right.
But the question is, how far? 60% lower. So I had been sitting in my chair thinking, because my knees dropped 2 inches lower than my hips are here, my knees dropped 2 inches lower, that was enough. And I kept scratching my head going, why is sitting at the chair so much causing my calves to cramp? Because I wasn't getting any circulation down my legs, because I was cutting off the circulation at the hip joint, which is part of the problem of too much sitting.
I wonder too, because with too much sitting, of course, you get the hip flexors shortening, and then you lose tone in the
pelvic floor and the transverse abdominis.
And you can't have any core support then. I'm wondering if that angle would also encourage just open the hip flexors up a little bit. I don't know if that.
Yeah, it does open them a little bit. I'm actually at a 60 or 75 degree angle right now. And it actually does open them up quite a bit. And there's just a sense of ease through the legs. And then, of course, then I have to sit up straight. So then I have to use my spinal muscles, and I have to use my transverse abdominis. But then the hip flexors, as you said, are going to be a little softer and a little bit more neutral.
Can I ask you to zoom out a little bit? So we talked about the posture of sitting, but could we now talk about posture and the spine? Because what happens with sitting is you kind of you can affect the curves in your spine in a detrimental way. You lose tone, muscle tone, you're certainly going to lose core support. lots of stuff happening, circulation not happening, all of those things happening. But the big problem, I think, with all of that is posture, because the effects of dysfunctional postural patterns can be, again, on that whole kinetic chain. Let's talk about the kinetic chain just of the spine, of the skeletal, muscular, and nervous system. And we haven't even brought in circulation, but can you just talk about posture?
I am going to talk about posture, and I'm going to go someplace you didn't expect.
Oh, good.
Posture, there are certain key muscle groups to help improve our posture. And certainly everyone needs to bring their spine more in line with gravity. There isn't a person out there that doesn't need to consider that. And the more a person sits, or the more a person labors and lifts heavy objects, or works out with weights so that the front of the body is more contracted, the more they need to adjust their posture. So adjusting the posture means that the psoas muscle has to be addressed. It has to be softened, lengthened, and then toned. And I say it in that order because you can't, if you try and tone a muscle that's already contracted and like stuck in a contracted position, it's not going to change anything.
Or could probably damage. You could probably injure yourself if you try to pull on a tight muscle that's not going anywhere.
I don't know that the psoas injures very easily.
Not the psoas, but
I think what would happen is that if somebody pushes it, like say somebody's got a really short psoas and they've got short quads also, maybe from cycling all the time or sitting all the time or something, gardening all the time, and they start doing stomach curls because they figure they're going to tone their psoas and do stomach curls. They make the psoas and the quads shorter and shorter and shorter. And when they do that, they compress the front of their vertebra deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, which is exacerbating the problem, which then leads to a bulging disc in the back. So, I'm really careful with my clients that have back conditions to lay them on the floor, get them to lengthen everything out, gradually tone the psoas, work on lunges, low lunge, high lunge, Virabhadrasana 1, baby back bends. All of those things are important to lengthen the front body, the quads, and the psoas. Now, once that's done, then you got to work on the chest. You got to open the front of the chest. Why? Because the pectoralis major and minor, coracobrachialis in the front, they are the powerful muscles. They hold our arms into center. So if you got on all fours like your loyal canine, like the puppies, if we got down on all fours and we examined our musculature, you're going to see that the mass of muscles on the inside of the arms and on the inside of the legs, the adductors, are the biggest muscles in the body because they hold the arms and legs onto the skeleton. Okay, they hold them onto the skeleton. But then they get too contracted. The upper back rounds forward. We get weakness in the upper back. We get spurs in the neck because then somebody lifts their head and they're pinching the discs in their neck. So the posture piece is that all this in the front has to come up and roll back. Right? The shoulders need to live on the back body. They were designed to be back there. If we're going to stand upright, the shoulder blades have to be on the back, not forward on top of the shoulders.
As you did that little gesture, I saw your breath opening up. I saw your circulation opening up. I saw your energy channels kind of getting cleared of obstruction.
There you go. Let's talk about that energy channel for a minute. Because what is this right here? This is the spiritual heart center. And if somebody's going to change their posture, they got to also get a sense of, how's my heart? Am I willing to be seen? Am I willing to stand up straight? Yeah, so there's that aspect of the practice that sort of brings us to the doorway of that so that we can see that part of ourselves. And to me, that's the deeper, we talk about yoga, and I'm so appreciative of all the research that's being done and anatomy and movement and yoga research to show how yoga has an effect, and measuring all those things, because that's information that's really helpful to us as a culture, right? And then inside of that, the hidden secret is that we breathe deeper, we release our anxiety, or we discover our anxiety and find a way to work with it by engaging a therapist of some kind, right? So that we can come forward into our true nature, which would be loving, kind, and compassionate. And so that's the direction to go in. And I think that's where the heart has to be considered as part of a posture piece.
Beautiful. And that's why we do yoga and not posture assessment, or we don't work at the auto mechanic shop. We do yoga, which is a whole body endeavor.
Mind, body, spirit. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, we have some good questions. Is that okay if we take a couple questions?
Sure.
We have someone who's written in very discouraged because she's got, we're not going to go into all of her intricate details, but she's been, despite all best efforts of doing yoga, eating right, following all the rules, she's received a diagnosis of osteoporosis, which, as we know, can be from so many other things besides what you did.
So I don't know who this dear woman is, but I'm going to tell her, don't worry.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is she's kind of afraid of her body at this point and
Right.
doesn't know how to move and all of that.
All right, so don't worry. Here's true confessions. I have osteoporosis. I was diagnosed with osteoporosis when I was 59. It was a shock. I thought, holy mackerel, how did this happen? And I spent 3 days sitting down trying to figure out how the heck it happened. And my decision was that I had spent the previous almost a full 30 years teaching yoga for back pain. And so that's what I was practicing. I was practicing yoga for back pain, which is relieve the spasm, traction the spine, open up the joints, some toning, but not a lot of toning, because somebody who's got back spasms and a back condition, it would take me in my classes 6 months to a year to get them to the point where they were actually ready to tone their spine. It takes time. It doesn't happen. It didn't undo overnight, and it doesn't redo overnight. So it's a commitment that we make to ourselves to go forward. So what I would say to her is, get my new course from YogaU. Because that's what I was addressing. But here's the good news. Once I realized that, and I changed the way I was practicing my yoga. Now I wasn't honored to be part of one of Dr. Lauren Fishman's bone density studies. I wasn't honored to be part of that. I just kind of made it up and said, okay, how can I start being more dynamic? And I started doing that. Plus, I took a supplement that was a research-based supplement to help bone density. It's from Integrative Medicine. It's called Osteoprime Forte. And changing my practice, and in 2 years, I had my DEXA scan went backwards 1.3 backwards from where it was. So I'm not going to share exactly where it was because it was ridiculous. But I did get it to go backwards, and it has stayed there. It has not gone into more osteoporosis. I do know that I need to do more extension exercises, especially because I sit and do blogging now to try and get the word out to more people, right? So I have to do extension exercises to keep my spine strong, because if I don't, then it's going to start being a problem again.
I do know you're going to cover this in your course, but can we, and I've got other questions that I'm going to get to in a second, but can we, for someone I've been diagnosed with osteoporosis, what's the priority problem? In other words, is it strength building? Is it relax, don't panic, because that's going to make you fall, and falling is the problem? Or where would you start for her?
Always relax. You got to trust your body that if you give it the right conditions, it will change and it'll improve. And you are in control over that. So, so calming the heart, saying, okay, heart, I want to know the right way to go. I want to meet the right people who are going to help me find the right way to go. And I'm going to test out a few things and see what it feels like. Ultimately, some strength has to happen. Pelvic floor strength, lower abdominal strength, spinal strength, holding your standing poses, getting your hips underneath you in your standing poses so your butt's not poking out in the back, but get it under you and do a proper, Virabhadrasana 2 standing pose or Virabhadrasana 1 and really engage your muscles. So that's the thing with flow yoga, flowing from one thing to another is lovely to do some of the time, but not all of the time. So when we talk about keeping some suppleness, I teach now at a hot yoga studio. My classes are warm. They're 74 to 78, so they're warm classes at a hot studio. But I also teach a lot of alignment, and I teach muscular engagement. So it's lovely because the students go to both classes. They'll go to a hot class just to get everything flowing and moving, and then they come to my class to stabilize. And so it's a nice complement, right? And we need to be open to doing things differently. We get to where we are because it's the result of what we did before. And if we want the result to be different, we have to change what we do. And that goes on for the rest of our lives. And you never know when you're going to have the opportunity to change something again. But don't worry about it, because
Your body, I think a lot of the extreme contraindications and warnings have kind of made people afraid of their bodies. And if you didn't have a DEXA scan and you didn't know what your bone density was and your shoe was untied, wouldn't you just go tie your shoe? I mean,
I usually do. You just got to sense it out, and if you're not, it's the same thing with spinal stenosis. Currently, there's a lot of diagnosis of spinal stenosis, and I said to a medical professional one time, I said, so why do you think that is? Do we just have more spinal stenosis because of our diet? Or do we also have equipment that's so much better because technology is advanced that it's now reading it on everybody, and then everybody's having a panic attack?
correct.
So, we got to not have a panic attack. You got to trust that your body will do what you ask it to do. So you got osteoporosis. Do you walk a mile a day? If you don't, start there. 1 mile is 20 minutes.
So actually, one of our questioners is struggling with spinal stenosis and degenerative discs, and she'd like a little your views. What if anything can you offer? And I know it's very general, so be very general.
Really general. Oh, of course. Depending on the severity of the spinal stenosis, it gets really tricky. Because the people who really have severe spinal stenosis, the only way to get relief is to have an operation and get it drilled out. Right? So, because there's a diagnosis of spinal stenosis, the first question I ask myself is, are any nerves pinching? Do I have any nerve pain? Is it radiating across my lower back, down my legs? Is it radiating? Is there any kind of nerve involvement? And if there is, then I really want to watch it closely and find somebody who's a really good, physiotherapist or something, a physiatrist or somebody who knows about movement and can help me find the best movements to do to maybe relieve some of that, and then go from there. That's one of the things that in the extreme cases, traction doesn't work that well. In the milder cases, traction can help, like a traction dog pose or toot belt tractions, and those are in my book. But find somebody, she needs to find somebody who can help her. And yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions about, first of all, I have to tell you, Sandra has a good name for awkward chair pose, which I've started calling it fierce pose, because I think that is actually one of the best poses in yoga that we all hate.
Well, not only should it be called fierce pose, but it's because it is fierce, and you should do it as if it's fierce.
I hate it, and I do it every day.
Because it's the fastest pose to build pelvic floor and lower abdominal tone and maintain bone density in your hips. That's it, hands down.
However, Sandra has a different name for it.
What'd she call it?
Awful pose.
Awful pose.
Sandra, I think we could all.
You're so awful that I just love how you helped me.
I hate you so good. A couple of people have asked about, I'm going to call it counterposing sitting all day by using better vehicles. So they're asking about kneeling desks, standing desks, and how to sit with your feet at the 60-degree angle.
The 60-degree angle has to do with your chair being tall enough, almost like a stool, like a small stool height. I have two things. I have an old German chair that I'm sitting on right now that has a seat that tilts. So I can, instead of it going straight, the seat tilts a little bit like this. And then the back will push really in. So if I do lean back, I can throw my shoulders back and my back is arched. It's not rounded. And my feet are flat on the floor, but my legs are at the 60-degree angle. So my stool is up pretty high. My stool is up pretty high. So, standing desks are great because you can go up and down. And I think that's great, a standing desk and getting out of the chair and then going back in and getting out. Changing position often is really part of the key.
What do you think about, one of the things I got from a really Tom Myers workshop years ago was change your shoes frequently. Like sometimes multiple times a day, change your shoes because you're changing the proprioceptive surface that your feet are interacting with. What do you think about kind of switching out chairs every so often?
I think if you ask my family,
chairs, that is,
they would tell you I have taken more chairs to the home store than just about anybody I know. And the kneeling chair. She asked about the kneeling chair. I think the kneeling chair will work for some people. I found that it did not work for me because I have that narrow disc space in my lower back and the grade 1 spondy, and it would throw me into that spondy and actually create more discomfort and pain in my back than not using it. So that one just went to the home store.
Okay, there's a question, and I think this is going to really have to be the last question. Well, I'm going to give you two questions. I'm merging two questions. Is it true that squatting poses should be avoided by people with knee bone-on-bone arthritis? And then someone else had asked a different question. Are there any yoga poses you don't recommend anybody do? So let's talk about squatting first, because squatting is a super important human.
If somebody has bone-on-bone on their knee, why would you want to squat? Why would you want to squat? There's something in yoga called ahimsa. That's kindness. Kindness. If you have a degenerative joint, why be unkind? If you can find a way to work with it therapeutically, like the chair pose, squeezing a block between your knees, which I think is quite doable, and you can find a way to work with it therapeutically so it doesn't irritate and make it feel worse, then certainly I think you should do that. I'm not one to shy away from a challenge by any means, but if you really are bone on bone, don't do it. Just don't do it.
But you could, as you said, if you had the block between your legs and you just pressed into the floor, you could get a little bit of the
Of movement, sure,
intended
sure. And then you have to
benefit without stressing your joints.
right, and then you have to find a teacher to guide you.
Exactly.
You have to have a teacher to guide you that knows what they're doing.
Now you've got a class coming up. I don't want to leave you without hearing about this class. And your class is called Yoga for a Healthy Spine, the #1 key to enhance strength, improve posture, and prevent osteoporosis. I assume nothing that we talked about today will be included in that course, right?
No, nothing. But I will tell people that the way I designed it was the first pod, the first practice session, there's the lecture part, and then the first practice session is just for improving posture and very fundamental moves that work really well when they're repeated often. And all of my students can do that, even my 80-year-olds. So it's something that I think you can teach to just about everybody. I mean, I'm sure there's some exceptions. There always are. And then the second pod is the beginning of lengthening and extending the spine. So starting to move into some of the upward dogs and the Shalabhasana progressively. The third pod are the powerful standing poses and the twisting poses that are part of the osteoporosis research study. So those are the ones mostly from that study. I made a few variations, not very much, because we need some powerful standing poses also for the hips and the spine. And then the fourth one is for the intermediate student. For somebody who's ready to move forward, they like doing up dog, they like doing down dog, and they want to improve it, and they want to move forward a little bit into the beginning of Urdhva Dhanurasana, a back bend. And so there's that intermediate segment. So I've tried to kind of satisfy everybody and give the range of progression about how you can practice and start progressing yourself toward a full back bend if that's what your heart's desire is.
It also sounds like something that a practitioner will find useful and a teacher will find useful because a teacher will be able to kind of weave your ideas into whatever their practice is that they're teaching.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's critical because our culture is a sitting culture. I think it's really critical that we learn how to teach extension poses and don't avoid them. And sometimes teachers avoid teaching extension poses because they're afraid they're going to hurt somebody's back because they don't know how to progress. And so I think I've covered a lot of the elements that many of which we've talked about and some other pieces too in the course. So I hope it's really useful to everybody.
So the name of the course again, and you can find it on the YogaUOnline portal website, is Yoga for a Healthy Spine, the #1 key to enhance strength, improve posture, and prevent osteoporosis. And with that, Lillah, this has been awesome.
It's been a lot of fun, and I want to thank everybody who joined us on the call.
Thank you for your good questions and your great participation, and we'll see you soon on Facebook Live again.
Okay, great.
Bye, everybody.
Namaste.
Namaste.